and and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I know everyone's excited. Sports is on the mind. Unless you're watching from San Antonio, a lot of good feelings about the Knicks. And people from New York were friendlier than ever. Just experienced big victory. Got the World Cup going on and all the excitement that associated with it. NBA draft. Every NBA team maybe is hopeful. As a Dallas Mavericks fan, I can attest to that. And I get a chance to be here with some incredible experts and helping to kind of navigate this conversation around the relationship of parents and players, how they're protected, how they're being partnered with, and delivering a great youth sports experience. And I could not be more excited today. I had a chance to spend. I've known some of these panelists for years, but had a chance to spend time more recently with them, and found the conversation profound. And I know you will as well. I want to start by thanking Anchored for collaborating today in this conversation. Whether you're watching this live or watching a recording or clips of it, we certainly appreciate their collaboration in working to make youth sports safer and better. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I am the president and the quarterback at LeagueApps. And I'm joined here with three extraordinary individuals who I'll introduce in a second. But I want to start maybe just by framing the topic in a few different ways. And I think the first thing I would say is that when I think about youth sports, if you're running an organization, we're right now there's a tremendous amount of change that is happening in youth sports, and I think there's three different lenses of what's driving that change. One, there's a technological lens. AI is probably the best example of that. That how people are measuring data, how you're running your organization. There's a way that technology is affecting both society and organizations. There's a structural change happening in youth sports. There's a consolidation. There's investment capital coming in. There's organizations that are big or growing dramatically faster than organizations that are small and community organizations. There's different relationships that professional leagues or teams are as they're getting involved in this space. And lastly, there's a societal change, like the societal forces that are going on. And it's in that lens I think we'll spend time together today, because as we try to understand that relationship with parents and families, as we start to think about this idea of protecting them and delivering a youth sports experience, is just to recognize there's a lot of forces that suggest that what is today is changing, right? So that change may be driven by economic insecurity for parents who are wondering if their kids are going to be better off than they will, because for the first time in measured history, that's actually not likely to be the case. That kids in this generation are not as well off as their parents. That anxiety they have about getting their kids into college and whatnot. There is an underlying insecurity around safety and a question what's going on. And you see that through the public stories about abuse and some of the worst scandals that are happening, but also in the reality that we've gone from 30 insurance carriers to 5 insurance carriers because of the level of risk that is seen in youth sports today that suggests there's something going on. You have congressional legislation that's being introduced in hearings that are going on, talking about the affordability of youth sports and what's happening, because there's a lot of questions that parents are asking about the value they're getting and whether this is fair, whether this is right. So we're operating at a time of a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty. And I think the one thing I can be certain about is whatever it is today will be different in the future. And the real hope from this conversation is, can that future be better? Which I'm very optimistic, right? Can ultimately we make youth sports a better experience with better organizations, with better relationships with parents and kids? And that part may be aspirational on the parents' side. But is that the opportunity? And I think that's where the starting point of this conversation is today. I think the second is that the title of today's conversation is about protecting your players and parents. And when you think about that idea of protecting, and you think about players and parents, if we break that up, there's obviously a literal sense of safety about protection, right? That if you can't make things safe to begin with, none of the benefits of sports happen. So we'll certainly get into that. But then there's also a deeper meaning to that idea of safety, which is the environment that's being created for kids, one where actually kids thrive, where parents understand their role, where the experience delivers what it promises. That ultimately are we creating a youth sports experience that's protecting what youth sports is supposed to be about and delivering the kind of experience we hope. And I think the premise for this conversation is, well, there's a lot of good things that are happening. There's a ways to go. So I'm excited to welcome in three panelists that are deep experts here from a research perspective, from an academic perspective, from an experiential perspective, today's conversation. Joining me is John Solomon, who's the research director at the Aspen Institute and Sports and Society program, which does incredible work, and proud for LeagueApps to be involved for almost the inception of Project Play. And appreciate you being here today, John. I know also you bring a personal lens to this from a parent, a coach perspective. We've got Linda Flanagan, who brings the lens of an athlete, of a parent, of a journalist, of an author, of an expert who really studied youth sports and written an incredible good book called Take Back the Game that I know has provoked a lot of thoughts and questions for how we can make youth sports better. And then lastly, but not least, we've got David Sikorjak, and hopefully I got that name right. And David, you could correct me. A new friend of mine and someone who I find is a profound thinker, an author, focusing on the premise that fans have more friends, has a deep expertise in consumer research and insights, and excited for you to join us today. So maybe just as a starting point, and I'll start with you, Linda. When we talk about this conversation of youth sports and we talk about this idea of the relationship with parents and kids and ultimately delivering an experience, protecting the kind of experience that they want, maybe share a little bit about how you're coming at this conversation. Why are you here today? What's brought you into this conversation from a youth sports perspective?
Right. Well, I have been or had been a coach for many years, and I think it was my experience coaching high school girls that really got me interested in the subject. I'm also a parent, so I could see what the universe was like from that side. But I was very troubled even when I started at how I felt the system had changed. That the purpose of youth sports, at least how I understood them, had been transformed and kind of warped into something where they were transactional, they were a means to another end, and that what I thought of as the inherent value in athletics and team sports and individual sports exercise was just devalued, and that something was going on that I needed to explore. So that's when as I experienced this, both as a coach and a parent, that's when I decided to like look into it and kind of discover what's happening behind the scenes that you're not really thinking about if you're just taking your kid to a game. And that's really what my book is about, and what we've all been talking about for years now.
Appreciate that, Linda. And John, when you think about, obviously the Aspen Institute Project Play is well known, but when you think about the personal lens you're bringing to this conversation and in this topic, maybe let the folks watching understand the lens by which you're coming to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. One is as a researcher and a former journalist who studied youth sports for the past decade, but also to Linda's point, as a parent and also have been a youth sports coach. I've had, two children who have played youth sports. We've gone through some of the really bad experiences, like highly competitive t-ball at age 5 with double elimination tournaments, and teaching the wrong skills and tactics to like wonderful experiences as well. And I've also been a youth sports coach in football, flag football, baseball, soccer, and basketball. But largely, I think I come to this conversation through the lens of what children want out of their sports experiences and really listening to them and understanding their interests and their needs, because I don't think enough adults actually do that.
I appreciate that, John. And I'm starting to think about what it would be like as a parent, let alone a kid in a double elimination 5-year-old T-ball tournament, and what that experience would be. David, I'm excited to have you join these conversations about youth sports. I know you're at the Project Play Summit. I know you've come at this a little bit differently. So maybe explain a little bit about kind of your background, the work that you've done, and how that's led you into these kind of youth sports conversations today.
Yeah, I do a lot of consulting work, mainly with Fox Sports, but other sports organizations. And we had been studying sports fans for years. And one insight that kind of kept on creeping up in our early days of studying it, and I'll get my Knicks plug in there. I did work at Madison Square Garden, so this all started with the Knicks, and it was nice to see it come together. That when we were doing ethnographic research with fans, we saw that there was a deeper social infrastructure in place. That actually what was driving them, or the hypothesis was, to be a fan is to be part of a community. What was driving their engagement was the people around them. You watch because of the people next to you. So we began testing that, and kind of the culmination of these tests were in our book called Fans Have More Friends. That the bigger the fan you are, the more friends you have, the more connected you are to your friends, the stronger relationship you have with your family, the happier you are, the less depressed you are, the less lonely you are, and the more you are engaged with society, the more likely you are to vote, the less polarized you will be versus the other side. That's all in a book and spelled out. But we got to the point where we saw fandom as a social good, not just as an entertainment vehicle. It's a belonging vehicle. And what we need in our society is more belonging. And so we need to increase fandom. And that brought us to youth sports, of like, how is that next generation of fans being formed? And as we kind of inserted ourselves into what was the discourse on youth sports, we are fascinated by the question. Um, I'll when we started for fandom, we were fascinated by the question: why would somebody for 20 years buy season tickets to the Knicks? What would be the reason when they were the worst franchise in all of basketball? Why they would do it? The answer was belonging. So now we get to use sports when things have gotten harder. Things that, there are a lot of challenges there. Parents are spending more money, more time. A lot more confusion exists. Why are parents spending more money? The participation rates are flat to increasing. What's going on? And where we've come to is there is a similar social infrastructure in play that allows parents to bond with their kids and connect with their kids and be part of them growing up to adults. And that, whether parents know it or not, I think a lot of this operates on the unconscious, is the real reason why parents are doing this, why they're pouring the money, they're pouring the time, doing these things.
Yeah, and I appreciate, and so I love the fact that each of you are coming at this from a research lens, but also a personal lens as well. And as we jump into this conversation, the first is I'm going to be bold and set an expectation, a high expectation for this conversation, which is that people are going to walk away with some kind of insight or some kind of aha that they'll think back 6 months from now, a year from now. It'll be something they'll repeat at the dinner table. It'll be something that'll be like, wow, it changes the way I'm thinking or approaching this at a more fundamental level because of something that's been surfaced in this conversation, right? And as the point guard of this conversation, the Jalen Brunson of this conversation, my hope is to kind of elicit that because I know we've got a great discussion. I think the second thing is there also something you could take back to a staff meeting this week, with something that you could say, hey, I could actually apply this as from an understanding in a practical way, which is I think where we'll land the conversation. So if we start with this premise that there's a lot of changes that are happening in youth sports, and I would assert that there are some organizations that are going to figure out and thrive, and then some will not, and they will not be around. That we are in this evolutionary period where there'll be less organizations delivering more experience, hopefully better experiences for kids. Then I would say, okay, which organizations are going to be the one that succeed? And I think it starts with the premise of, do you understand the customer, right? In this case, you've got the parent and you've got the kids that are investing their time, investing their resources. Whether you're a for-profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter. What is the way to have that understanding? And I think that understanding is important because what are they expecting versus what you're delivering? And what Disney showed as they're building their business in youth is that ultimately, if you can exceed or meet those expectations, you're in great shape. And when you don't, you won't be successful. That's where Disney really understands the practice of surprising and delighting and over delivering on those experiences as you watch an amazing parade come through or something you didn't expect, like fireworks. In this case, though, I think it starts with what are the expectations in youth sports? And let's start, John, maybe with you, because you brought kids up and it's starting to understand like what do kids actually want out of this? What do they expect? What are they coming to this? What does your research show that they really want?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I think just important to note from the top is that household income actually is one of the biggest predictors of whether a child plays sports, ever plays sports at all. So, like when we surveyed youth nationally, children from low income families were 4 times more likely to have never played sports compared to youth from high income families. So, as we talk about this, I just wanted to sort of like level set that because there are many kids who just won't even have an opportunity to play due to finances. But when we survey kids, like in every community, we do state of play community reports across the country. We just did a national youth survey as well among youth who currently play sports, those who formerly played sports and stopped, and those who have never played sports. I mean, the research is really clear that the top reasons children play sports are to be with friends, and to have fun. Doesn't matter if it's a rec sports player, doesn't matter if it's a travel sports player. The main reasons why they want to play are these social factors. There are other reasons as well, but just not ranking as high. Learning new skills, challenging themselves, being active and healthy, those are up there as well. But near the bottom of the list are winning and chasing college scholarships and college roster spots. They rank very low. So I would argue if your program is optimized for winning games and chasing college scholarships at the expense of children having fun and being with friends, I'd say you're optimizing for the wrong customer. The reality is children want to have fun. They want to play with friends. So we can get into a little bit what we mean by having fun because there are some definitions along those lines. But the reality is they often play for the social reasons. But the structure of youth sports led by adults is highly commercialized, high time intensive, and very costly.
So, and John, and I want to pull Linda in now because what you're describing is this notion of one, what kids really care about at the top is this idea of belonging and fun, right? And then there may be other things that are part of it or other things that get attention. The question then, Linda, is as we think about what is fun, right? I
Hmm.
know there's some research that you were mentioned that's been done on this, and then I'm also curious then what gets in the way of fun or what gets in the way of belonging when you think about how the experience is delivered. But maybe you could start by saying what is actually fun. What is the way that youth sports is delivering that kind of belonging in the best case scenario?
Well, and I have mentioned that there's a woman at GW, George Washington, who has studied this, Amanda Visick, and she's done this mapping of fun specifically related to youth sports and across the ages, I think from 6 to 16. There's not just like little kids. And what she found is that kids define fun. There were three main definitions. One was being a good sport, and that includes a lot of subcategories like playing well on a team, being connected to teammates. So that's the connection piece. Supporting my team, like kids like consider that fun. They also think that it's fun to have a positive coach, not one who's screaming at them like they're rented mules. That's also fun. Another is trying hard, and this is the one I think that is the most apt to be confusing for people because I think we associate fun with, you know, goofing off or just laying around. And really, it's working hard at something. And kids working hard on a shared goal is fun for kids at all ages. And I think to the extent that programs can do those three things, kids will be having fun. Now, there's another bit of research I think it's relevant, and that's what keeps kids in and what keeps anyone involved, and what promotes intrinsic motivation. And here the research of Daniel Pink is relevant, I think. And he identifies three, and there's others, it's 3 to 4 main concepts. The one is autonomy. And this applies to adults too. You're much more motivated to do something when it's your decision, your choice. When there's an opportunity for competence or mastery of the thing. So getting better at the sport, say, improving is really motivating. Belonging, feeling like you fit in with this group. There's a lot of overlap with what's fun. And also purpose, having a sense of purpose. All of those attributes make you more motivated. And I think that's important when you consider attrition rates. It's not only getting kids to start, you want them to stay. So how do you keep them motivated? And I think to the extent, again, that organizations can highlight or at least tap into those drives, they'll be more successful in keeping kids in their program because it will address what's really fundamental to kids.
Yeah, one thing I think as you're describing, it seems like what you're describing is I think you also alluded to this, John. Those things are all accessible in that it doesn't depend on whether you win the tournament or win the game or get a scholarship. That in reality, if you're building an experience or designing intentionally in a way that creates autonomy or builds competence that establishes belonging, that instills a sense of purpose, or this idea of ways you're building in how people are supporting the team and in a positive environment. Those are all things that allow people to experience something that they're enjoying. Therefore, they're going to want to do more of it. That isn't actually depending on an outcome that you might not be able to control. David, to pull you in this because it seems like belonging has come up a lot about what kids want. Maybe that's also what parents want. We'll get into parents in a second. But what fosters belonging, and then what actually gets in the way of it? Like, are there things that people are experiencing in youth sports that get in the way of the outcomes that make youth sports great? Of what kids really want? And conversely, what is the thing that actually fosters those outcomes that they want?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to build on what Linda said. There is it's the opposite. You have a bad coach, a disengaged coach. It's not going to be as you're not going to be connected there. You're not going to feel like you're part of the group and you're contributing to the group. If you're on with one challenge from year to year, your kid might be on a different team and they don't have the same bonds with the kids, and there's clickiness or something. And that it's an obvious thing, but it takes away from that feeling, from that shared nature that we as humans desire. It's also, if it's too hard, too easy. And every kid is different in this regard, just based on their athletic. This is is my experience as a coach is one of the hardest things to actually calibrate of getting matching the level to the kids. If it's too easy, the kids disengage and they become less connected to the group, to the thing, and vice versa. If it's too hard and push too much, and there's a right balance, and that's a hard thing to do. That needs a good coach. It needs a good organization to be able to calibrate that, and that's really a hard thing. And what in our research we see that's where parents, the kids who survive through those things, because you could see it's hard to pick the kids and align the kids so they're as one cohesive group. It's hard to find good coaches. That's well documented. And the parents that do this well kind of step in and help in that regard. In terms of filling in or supporting their kids when those things are not clicking, when they're not experiencing that sense of belonging.
Yeah. So, and what as we talk about parents, I think it's interesting to note on kids that I think what we're ultimately describing is for the kids to get this benefit that they want, there's a degree of psychological safety they need as they're part of this experience. Because fundamentally, in order to focus on mastery and doing things that are hard, it has to be okay to fail, right? And in
Mhm.
order to feel like you want to connect with people that you may not otherwise know, you got to feel that it's okay to do that. You got to feel like it's safe and comfortable to be able to do that. So the environment that we create that allows for that fun, that allows for that sense of belonging, I think is a big part of how kids are going to stick with it and have a good experience. So that's one piece of this. Then let's get to the parents because that's how kids are experiencing it. But then there's the parent dimension. Maybe David, to stay with you, what are the ways we think about what parents are looking for in terms of their expectations? And is that expectation, do they look back? I think we were talking a little bit about how they might look back and define that differently than how they might think about it while they're experiencing it themselves. Like the water cooler talk and the narrative around this. How are parents experiencing youth sports today, and what are they actually looking for?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of highs and lows of they don't know, right? They're going through this and they're taking their kids to tournaments over the weekend and spending time and making sure they get dressed and fed and all the things that parents do in that regard. And ultimately what is motivating them, what they see, whether they're conscious of it or not. Normally in qualitative conversations, it is something you prod parents on. It's like, oh, you spent that weekend away and you had to drive to Delaware and it was stressful and all that. It's like, well, you guys talked for an hour in the car. And having that precious time with kids when we know they're going to leave the nest at some point is ultimately what parents want. They are there with their kids. They're involved with their kids. They're going through the highs and lows. It's a shared experience, and there's not many shared experiences that we get to have with our kids that we're in it together. And parents are just trying to get by in many cases with this. But I think what keeps them going, what I argue, what keeps them going is this is just time with their kids that they know they're not going to have forever.
And so one thing I think you're saying is in some cases they might complain about the opportunity cost of that time or there's a lot of stuff, but in the end,
100%.
when they look,
Yeah.
I guess your point is when they look back at it, they actually value this shared experience. And why do they value that shared experience? Like when you look back at the research, what is it telling you of the importance of that in that dynamic of their relationship?
Once they see it as a relational experience, not a transactional experience of my kid is going to make this level and get this scholarship or that. Once they see it as this is time, this is something our family has done together, and see all those trips, see the time, see have playing, from the early days of having a catch in the backyard, throwing a football, shooting basketball, whatever that is, the family trips that were made around this. Once they see the tapestry of all that was involved in it, it's hard to look back at that and say, oh, now I see what this is, and this was far more meaningful than just, oh, and Jeremy got to go to play at GW.
Yeah, it's interesting as we think about this in the sense that the thinking about the psychology of the parent, which is one, I feel this now. My daughter's now 11, and it's like, wow, she's going to be out of the house soon, and it's like how every moment counts. And you think back to all
Mhm.
the time and those experiences. To your point, like how you might look back at that, that's different than like I got to go lug to a tournament for 8 hours over the next 2 days and give up my weekend while everyone else is doing something else because of this, right? There's this tension
Yeah.
that's there when but fundamentally their perspective may shift because in the long run it's actually what they're gonna value, but while they're going through it it may not be as clear. So
And
so so
definitely so.
go ahead.
No,
Yeah, and I
no,
guess
no, no.
Sean, when you think, no, good, David, please.
No, no. I think that is it. That's the challenge. Just to draw the parallel for my previous work on fandom, Part of our motivation writing the book was, if you're a fan, you have a social superpower, use it. You see somebody with a Spurs hat, make a joke, have fun with them. You see somebody, make fun of a Cowboys fan when you run into one. Whatever it is, you have a vocabulary, a set of takes that are fun, that normally make you happy and make the other person happy. And if especially if you're close to them. And I think we're developing a similar type of thing for parents. Don't look at it as drudgery, as frustration, even though it is frustrating. Look at it as an opportunity for bonding. This is time you're not going to get away. And I think reframing that, I would argue, would help parents navigate what is a complex world, what is difficult. And there are challenges in the system here to navigate. But I think this gives you more balanced perspective to say, oh, if my son's not on this team, it's actually not a big deal, because you are connected with your son. That's what really matters in this equation.
Yeah, John, what's your take as you've studied parents, surveyed parents, understanding what they want or what they say they want, and what does the data actually tell you what they want? Like, paint the picture a little bit about what's going in the head and the minds of parents and what those expectations are.
Yeah, I mean, so we've surveyed parents nationally in recent years, and one of the big takeaways was that roughly 2 in 10 youth sports parents believe their child has the potential to eventually play Division I college sports, and 1 in 10 parents think their child could play professional sports or reach the Olympics. The reality is, we know those odds are much longer, but that's driving some of this, right? Our survey also showed that more than half of sports parents feel some pressure to have their child specialize in one sport, and particularly at younger and younger ages, even though lots of research, the American Development Model, which is a framework for long-term athlete development, really recommends multi-sport play until at least age 12. But our survey found that, there is a good segment of parents who report that their child plays their primary sport 9 to 12 months a year. It was about 21%. And then 10% said they play their sport year round. So there's a healthy dose of FOMO, fear of missing out. I think that's happening with parents quite a bit. And they're being sold by the youth sports industry of that this is a very elite market, and that to succeed and to be successful in sports means that you have reached an elite level. And we are sort of discounting, I think, at least in the marketing and the messaging too often in youth sports, that participation and the value of that, and that sort of becomes viewed as being inadequate, when in reality, that can have so many benefits.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm curious, it's interesting the question of who's leading who here. Is the parent expectation driving how organizations are delivering experiences, or are organizations delivering experiences that are ultimately influencing parents' expectations at all? And I'm curious, Cynthia, if you think about this, especially if you think about the psychology of parents today. We've heard this word fear, right? Fear of missing out, right? Fear of the fact that what they may not have a relationship with their child that they want in the future. Fear of if their kids going to have the advantages or getting ahead in life. What and when you have that sense of fear, that drives maybe a lot of the behavior. So what is your sense of what parents are actually looking for? What's really driving what's going on that we can kind of demystify here?
Is that to me, Jeremy?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I just, there's a couple of thoughts I have to bring up in response to what David said. It's related to the question of fear. And that is, I think any kind of um, research that's like where people are asked to look back retrospectively and say, was it worth it? Or I think it's just not, and you may dispute this, David, but I feel like it's not reliable, because there is this self-justification bias when you think, you have to defend against decisions that might not have been the best, but it's really hard to own up to that. And I'm not saying that playing youth sports is a bad decision, but if it might have been, and it's really hard to say, gosh, that was a mistake. We really shouldn't have done that. Just because, you want to say, well, look how my child turned out, and you really have no way. You can't refute that, because they are who they are at the time. I also think there's a gap between stated and revealed preferences. So when parents say, "This is why I want to do it. I want my kids to have fun." For example, one of the Aspen studies surveyed parents about what they wanted in coaches. And the top two things that they said they wanted were they wanted the coaches to adopt philosophies that encouraged health and fitness. And then the second was equal playing time. Those were the top two. I think the revealed preference is quite different. I think the revealed preference is my kid plays more. And, you know, because he or she is better. And it's, there's this social desirability bias. You don't want to come off like a jerk. So you're going to say something that sounds palatable. Like, I just want my child to have fun and play. And this is not, of course, universal, but I think it's a factor in many parents' decision making. It's just not going to be stated in a survey. You know what you think
Yeah,
about that,
Linda.
David?
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it's interesting too, and I wonder, David, if the frame shifts in the sense that the criteria that you might have in the moment, when you look back, does the criteria by which you evaluate that experience actually change versus you're evaluating it through the same lens?
I completely agree with Linda. I think those both on the revealed preferences and the retroactive attribution. I think the approach that we take is far more holistic of like, what is the environment, what is the culture, what is the experience that is created as a result of participating in youth sports. And John talked about it's the rational way we look at things is looking at elite, looking at scholarship, and that to what John mentioned. And participation has value, and participation has value because it creates a structure that the family can engage in, that the kid has healthy behaviors around that, and interactions and friendships and relationships and experiences a sense of belonging. But in a broader sense, for parents who are, again, confused and maybe don't even know what they want. They want playing time because what else? I want my kid playing. I'm paying $2,000 a season for this. Of course, I want playing time. But I think there is an opportunity for parents to actually see the deeper system at play here, and which those things like scholarships and playing time, and being on a certain team or the status of being associated at a certain level can at least free parents from that burden or from that stress.
Linda, do you think that parents can be led as opposed to just being followed in the sense that if parents are presented with something that captures the virtues of youth sports, that frames it in the benefits, the long-term benefits of it that are more about relational value than necessarily performative value, do you think parents would subscribe to that, or do you believe that parents are just looking for another thing? Or can they be tapped into those virtues that you mentioned that youth sports was about if those are
Yeah.
presented and packaged in the right ways? Is that what they would choose through their expressed actions?
Uh, Gosh, I don't want to sound so cynical. And I'd like to believe that education, has an impact, that the more you know, the wiser you're going to behave. Um, I think they would be more apt to change their revealed preference if the incentives change, so that, there weren't this, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is the recruitment or the NIL deal or a scholarship, which even if they say, I don't really want that, or I don't really think that's possible, but that's sort of driving it. And the desire for prestige that we get from our kids when they're successful, when they're doing something that we can be proud of. All of the other qualities that we're talking about, the belonging, fun, kids having friends, that's kind of easily sort of crowded out by these adult um, desires. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in youth sports, that they've become less and less about kids and for kids, and they're more about serving adult desires and wallets.
Maybe at the heart of this, as we then advance the conversation a little bit here, is that at the heart of this is parents wants to be a successful parent. And to be a successful parent is defined by the fact of where their kids, do they have a relationship with their kids for the rest of their life? Will their kids talk to them? Are their kids not living in their basement, but going on and having actually more success than they had in life, more opportunity they had in life? Are they a good human, a good citizen, and what they're able to do to make that happen? Um, it seems like there's probably a large percentage of commonality that whether you care, whether your solution to that is scholarships, whether it's making the team, playing time, whatever else. At the end of the day, you want to be seen as a parent that didn't fail for those reasons, and you want to be seen by others as successful as well. And then the other secret is like like we're not making widgets. Like these are kids, and parenting is hard, and there isn't even easy handbook to make that happen. So if that's underlying, like how does a parent be successful? A lot of this is driven by the level of insecurity, the things that get in the way of them not being successful at it. And as I watched the interviews of the NBA draft last night, at the parents on the couch with the kids, that is the exceptional people that go, despite John's survey, ended up having professional athletes that made it happen. Um, but at the end of the day, we could all be sitting on the couch with our parents being interviewed by David, 15 years from now when my child is older, saying, what have they gone on to do? And can we look back and say, hey, did we put them in the right position? And could sports have played a role, not because of trophies or scholarships, maybe that happened, but because of the larger benefits associated with that. And so if we center this idea of what makes for a successful parent and the fear of someone failing as a parent, which I think so many people are driven by, I think the first thing I'll think about is like what are the different levels of that fear? So the first part about this is let's just talk about safety, like physical safety or mental health and everything else, because none of the benefits of youth sports exist if the kids aren't safe themselves, like the Maslow hierarchy kind of perspective. And I think we're living in an environment where there's more and more examples of wait a second, there's not enough safety around youth sports, right? I know more about a babysitter from care.com than I do about the coach. These organizations, there isn't necessarily all these requirements about background checks. You've got Safe Sport that has a significant increase the amount of investigations they're doing now. So as we think about like the idea of safety as just a basic level, I'm curious, John, what does your research tell you about what parents want from a safety perspective, right? If they have this fear, one of the worst fears you could have as a parent is that there's harm done to your kid, whether it's physical harm, concussions, mental abuse, mental health. How do parents think about that today?
Yeah, I think parents want to make sure that their child is safe and in a safe environment. And I often don't fault parents for some of their behavior or some of their the routes that they take. Certainly we've all seen the videos of some parents who are a little crazy and go viral. But the reality is they are entering into a youth sports system that is highly fragmented. There's no real structure around it, highly commercialized, and it's incredibly confusing, right? They don't know what like a positive healthy youth sports experience should look like. And in our society, we often sort of cater to the idea that the coach knows everything and the coach can do no wrong. And coaches are incredibly important and incredibly valuable, but coaches don't always know exactly how to handle concussions or, what safe sport compliant training, looks like, and if they've done that or if they've had background checks. And so I think parents want, safe and healthy experiences, but they're often sometimes not incentivized or perhaps to flip it around, are penalized if they even speak up and raise concerns and raise questions. There's fear from some parents that if I speak up and raise concerns about what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing, this impacts my child's status, with the coach, or on the team and playing time. And so there just needs to be some better transparency and better communication, healthier communication between parents and coaches and parents and sports providers than just assuming that every parent is in for the wrong reasons and then every sports provider doesn't do it correctly, right? I think that the more they are talking to each other and seeing actual training and actual compliance would go a long way.
Yeah, David, one thing I wonder is it seems like youth sports we're navigating paradoxes. On one hand, it's a place where you're getting these amazing physical benefits, but it also is a place where there's a risk of injuries, like a concussion, right? It's an amazing place where you can learn all this resiliency, but it's also a place that done right, the pressure that exists in youth sports can actually have negative mental health outcomes. So as you think about the safety and what parents are looking for, I think you mentioned to me that this is more of a feeling than it is a checklist. Maybe elaborate a little bit on this because it's almost like the Maslow hierarchy concept. If someone doesn't feel safe, nothing else matters. And it feels like we're entering a period of time where in an unregulated industry in a lot of cases where each organization is defining what they want to do on their own, this question of safety is starting to kind of get more and more attention.
Yeah, I think it ties in a few things, or this conversation ties in a couple of the threads here of because you asked before, you asked Linda before of can parents be taught these things, and it's hard. Right? Linda wasn't being cynical; she was being realistic. Like it's there's other things, other emotional factors driving it. But I think the safety bit, like as Linda was talking, I was thinking the safety bit is something that actually pushes them in the right direction, right? They're not thinking about these things. They feel actually a little bit more like, oh, I don't have to intervene here, or I don't have to be heavy-handed about this, or I don't have to misbehave badly. They're organized. They've got their, together. Is a big thing for parents. It's not something that they're thinking of, but when they see it, um, they feel good about it, and then they could see these other things, right? It's just when you're distracted by, oh, that guy doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing, or is this really safe, or I want to say something, but to John's point, I don't, if I say it might impact playing time. That's all just going to make a mess. That's going to snowball into other things. But when those things are taken care of and the parent has the confidence in it, I think it just sets the stage for better dialogue, better relational value for the family, and just overall a better experience.
Linda, when you think about this idea that safety is a precondition for everything else, there's both physical safety, there's also mental health and wellness. I know you've studied that quite a bit. What is your thought about what parents are looking for and expecting? And then how do you reconcile that with the fact that some of your research has shown that sports has actually created a lot of kind of negative aspects, especially on the mental health side?
Mhm. Well, I think this is where there's kind of a disconnect between what kids want and what parents want, and adults want, because kids want again to be with their friends, they want to have fun, they want to break from school, um, and sometimes the ultra competitiveness of the youth sports environment is you know eats away at that. And I think sometimes parents are pushing towards more competition, higher levels, more elite teams, and obviously some kids want that, but I think there is a good percentage who don't. And I think we really also need to look closely at boys, because as we mentioned, like 41%, it's only 41% of boys play sports now, from 50% in 2013. So that's a huge drop in the number of boys playing. And why is that? So, and I think, John, you brought up the other time that um, the video game, boys like maybe the safety of the video game world where there's no one hovering over them, telling them what to do. And they don't get that in sports where there's always someone correcting them, always, but, telling them what to do, what to wear, when to be there. There's a little autonomy, get back to autonomy. So I think, parents and kids have different notions of uh, safety and what's the point of this endeavor? What's the point of it?
Yeah, the mental model I have is like you can think about this as a triangle of the parent, the child, and the organization, or you could think about it like how do you get everyone on the same side of the table working together um, to align what kids are looking for, parents' desire to ultimately be a successful parent by making their child successful in the broadest sense of the world, and then what is the role of the organization in partnering to help deliver that? There are a couple of questions that started coming in, and it really starts to get to this question of like what can organizations do to make that, and how does organizations navigate this dynamic? So if we just say the idea that physical mental safety, there's like a precondition of what people want, then you get into the other thing, well, like how do you actually then get to this place where you're delivering this relational value that's connected to sport and all these other benefits that are associated with it? So I know Teresa put a question here about this navigating the pressure of that. It seems like the program offerings that exist today often lead people towards specialization, right? As opposed to something that's more skills development oriented as well. And what are the ways that organizations can provide the kind of offerings that kind of uh, provide that alternatives? And maybe John, starting with you, you've done this research that is it that what's driving that pressure of specialization, and what is the opportunity of organizations to approach it differently?
Yeah, I mean, organizations could, for starters, offer multiple sports, right? Different sports instead of specializing in one sport. It could be, all right, and for these particular months, we're offering, soccer, and then these particular months, here's, baseball or here's basketball. They could provide referrals, organizations to other organizations that are different sports. Now, the challenge is that everyone's competitive, right, and everyone's is trying to generate revenue and be able to stay afloat. And so organizations and sports providers often don't want to turn families and children to a different sport, right, and to a different organization away from their own. So either bringing in-house more multi-sport sampling opportunities, or also just recognizing that there's so much research out there showing that children who specialize in young ages are more likely to have burnout and more likely to have overuse injuries, that you could view it as an investment into yourself and into these families by encouraging them to take some time off, because hopefully these families will still come back to you in the future, and you're not going to be losing them due to burnout and injuries.
I'm curious if, and has anyone else seen examples in other industries, or do you think there's models of where there's the healthiest constructive relationship between the parent and the child, and maybe the third party that's delivering something to the child? And what are the best examples? Because I think what you're describing, John, there's a way of evolving the offerings that they could offer, right? Multi-sport or referrals. But so I guess the question is, are there models that out there of where organizations get this kind of thing right, that anyone can think of? Or is youth sports so unique that that doesn't exist? Like the education sector, is that a place to look for lessons or not, as an example? Since I've stumped you, I'm going to assume that that's not an obvious example that emerges. And what I would posit though is if you think about you enter a school, they might have an expectation when you're in lower school, right, and you go to a parent orientation, they're not talking to you about how you're going to apply to Harvard and your SATs, right? They're talking about like here's the foundational skills you're going to learn, the best schools, right? And they're trying to communicate this. How do you set that expectation? What are the parent conferences that align to that expectation? So as you navigate the journey, there's other things that become relevant over time. I often think that as my daughter started playing club lacrosse, you just start off and you don't have any of that navigation. So what is the way to recalibrate that experience for where you're at? Seems really important. And the ability for, to your point, John, create an environment where you're actually saying, hey, it's important that your child plays other sports. We want to elevate training over other things. And I think a lot of it a lot of this comes back in the communications to parents. And maybe David, I'll pose this question to you, and then I want to surface a question from Kim, and if there's others that people have as well, which is this idea that this may found like people might be listening to this conversation and saying, okay, what is the way to drive that reframe as you described, right? If we want to shift this notion that we know down the road they're going to think something about the experience that may be different than how they're thinking about it now, how can we make them appreciate what they're going to say in the future in the present, right? What is the way that you think that parents can be communicated with in a way that might resonate? And or beyond the communications, is there other kinds of actions that an organization could take that brings parents along in the right way?
Yeah, well, what comes to mind first is always having a long view. I mean, I like your framing there, Jeremy. I'm gonna use it of, we all want to be good parents and successful parents, and think about it in that framework, not whether they're going to make a certain team next season. Because part of this is organizations will go and push parents because they want their few $1,000s for that next season and say it's really important, and it's not. They're fine playing basketball, or fine playing field hockey, or fine taking off. Like, these things are not life and death. And um, I think the more we could get parents to think with a long view of developing the person, developing the athlete, and not so caught up in the short term, because there's so many other factors involved. It feels like the industry is going for the lowest hanging fruit, and that will, what's the metaphor? Cut off your nose to spite your face, or whatever. Like, I think that's where we're going. And the more we can convince parents that be balanced about this, have the perspective, support, push, you want them out there, but you're not going to live and die by a season. Like, that's not going to make you, and that's not going to make the person you are. It's certainly not going to make the relationship between you and your kids that way. Like, you're not missing out.
Linda, when you think about if you're running an organization, if you think about this idea of what is the way that an organization might think about designing and operating their programs that delivers on the promise that what you're describing, that creates an environment where it provides the basic preconditions of what people are looking for, but really starts to unlock the right kind of benefits. What would that actually look like? And how could organizations actually tap into that, delivering that?
Well, I think you first have to have the mindset that we're so good, we're doing this so right, that part of that means encouraging kids to play multi sports. I mean, I know many club and leagues do that. That we're so good, we're going to be completely transparent about the fees and everything. And if you don't want that, that's fine. Like, you have enough faith in what you're doing, and you're doing it right, so that you're not beating kids down, and you're exposing them to a broad array of sports. You're minimizing travel. you're taking away all the things that are extraneous, expensive, because you know what's important and you're going to convey that to parents. And if they don't want it, okay, they can go to another club. But kind of like I think about like a Harvard, are they going to like cave if they get pushback about things? No, they're like, we know what we're doing it right, and if you don't want to belong, you can go elsewhere. I think if youth sports organizations can do that, train the coaches, encourage multi-sport play, minimize travel, be transparent with parents, try as much as possible to view parents as partners, not adversaries. And I get that's hard at times. To just, to
Yeah.
hold firm to their to the mission. And also, I think David's research is so important to share about, well, look what we have found, this research about fans and being connected to sports and how close kids are to their parents when they play sports. Like, it's not across the board, but this is something that you should take with you. And look, don't you want to be a good parent? Like, there's the educational piece. As much as I scoffed at it, I think it's important. And if you can kind of work to shift the thinking so that it's not about this, future glory, that it's about now and building your relationships now and building healthy habits now for the future, for in perpetuity. That's going to hit some parents.
Yeah, maybe
Well,
posit
uh,
this question.
can I
Go ahead,
add
Dave.
one thing to Linda? Sorry, Jeremy. It's just, and the difficulty here is like the information environment we live in. What Linda described there is not gonna, the algorithm's not gonna favor it. A dad drunk at a baseball game is gonna get the reps. Kids getting injured is gonna be an art, like the negativity of these things. And what we have is a positive message and a more medium to long term way of view of it. And in the information environment we live in, it's harder to get those out. It's harder
Yeah.
to penetrate people's social feeds and get this way of thinking out there.
But if
Maybe
I,
one thing to go ahead, John, please jump in.
yeah, if I could just jump in real quick. I mean, I think one thing hitting on Linda's point though is that if we just operators provide greater transparency about their fees, their revenues and expenditures, their policies, just like right now, many youth sports organizations just operate in isolation. There's just limited transparencies, there's inconsistent financial oversight, there's like outdated governance, minimal accountability to the families they serve. And so like I look at like club sports websites fairly frequently for my work, just in different communities. And I rarely see the actual fees, that a family should expect, if they want to join. It's filled with tryout dates and how good the coaches are and how many players have reached, high school and college teams, but nothing about like what parents should actually expect to be paying for and where the money's going and what the policies are. So it's a quality experience. And I sometimes almost wonder if like youth sports needs like a cost of attendance page, like for colleges and universities, to provide like a realistic estimate of like how much this experience will cost and what the certain policies will be like. Because
Yeah.
we may be heading down that road at some point with federal legislation or state legislations, and sports providers could sort of get ahead of that right now by building trust with families with more transparency.
Yeah, I think that invitation for trust, and one thing maybe to integrate these comments, I think what I think is symptomatic is I don't think any of us, it may have been volunteer coaches, have ever showed up at a school saying, I was great at geometry. I'm just going to show up and teach geometry. You don't do that because there's someone who's trained to teach geometry. That's accredited and everything else. The dynamic in youth sports is who is the expert, right? And in the absence of that expertise being clear, the parents might say, well, I'm the expert. I can figure this out on my own. And I think the more that organizations can assert their expertise and demonstrate that expertise and professionalism through the way they run their programs, through the way that they communicate, through the transparency they offer, then that's the way that parents can listen. Because I think we live in an environment, historically in an industry that's been very volunteer driven, that's allowed then people to define for themselves what it is that they should be having. And as this industry evolves to be more professionals, then we need to listen to the professionals. But the professionals then have to act like professionals. And the best way to act like professionals is to operate based on transparency, operate based on the long view, communicate from that place. A couple rapid fire questions before we wrap with a thought. I know Jack Rozier has a question of if you're an organization, like a lot of this is happening in dealing with leagues and governing bodies. And so in many cases, family and the providers are having to deal with all the dynamics that exist, above them. John, you may be familiar with this because Aspen Institute brings a lot of folks together. Any immediate thoughts for Jack on how do you navigate as an operator when you're subject to the governance above you that may have itself have issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's doing what's right by kids and families. You're right. I mean, there could be certain policies that you have to follow, or maybe they're not even the best policies of what you agree with. So, I mean, it sort of depend on what the specific instance is, but I would just always lead with, what's right for the children, what's right for families.
Yeah, my general advice on this one is that one, I think that organizations need to do the right thing because at some point there's going to be more and more pressure for that to happen, whether it's federal or state, whether that's governance. The second thing is that the governing bodies that are getting in the way of organizations delivering the best experience for their families is not an organization or governing body that's going to be that useful or around in the long run. What I see is there's a lot of positive evolution that's happening in some of the governance in youth sports because they're realizing they got to center those that are delivering it. It's the operators that control the experience. You hire the coaches, you set the standards, you experience the parents. Don't you are the change you're waiting for. Don't wait around for anyone else. And if Jack, you have specific rules that are in your way, let me know, and I'll raise some heck about it. See if we can't make sure that's out of the way. Lastly, Linda, there's a question from Kim around what is the way to cultivate this idea of physical activity and habits outside of the organized sports? Because when they stop playing, is there something that happened? I know you're an avid athlete, like I think a lifelong runner as well. Anything you've thought about like, the best practices to be able to cultivate that long-term sense of physical well-being?
Well, I think first of all is modeling it as an adult. You can't be sitting around and then tell your kid to go out for a run. You have to be modeling. I like to go to the gym. I like want to come with me. Hey, you want to do a 5K? Modeling it yourself as a parent activity, encouraging free play. There's, the loss of free play has been so bad for kids because that's where they develop confidence and maturity and the ability to kind of be creative athletically. So free play, modeling, and also for the kids, maybe it's more appropriate for teenagers who don't like gym or they don't want to do sports. I think sometimes what works is getting a watch that counts steps because sometimes kids can really get into counting their steps. And if you just want them to be active and that's one kind of way they sort of get into it. So those are my three tips.
That's amazing. David, you have a final sentence of advice and perspective. I'll give John the same opportunity.
I'll close with your fandom is not irrelevant in this equation. Your fandom is where you can create shared rituals, shared passions, time together. It's meaningless in the sense that it doesn't matter. But when you do things together and you do it around this, it's one area where the parent-child dynamic is kind of equalized. You can watch together and experience it together. There's not many things you can do together. And if you see that time as this is bonding opportunity, the world will open up to you.
Amazing. And John, a final sentence from you.
Yeah, I'd say, follow children's leads. Follow their lead if you're the parent, if you're the sports provider, understand why they're playing sports, what they want to get out of their experience, and then give them that experience.
Not, I agree with. And so, first of all, a big thank you to David, Linda, and John for your incredible insights. We're going to be bringing people together again in July in partnership with Anchored again for another safety conversation. And maybe what I'll just leave you is the operators that are listening to this and watching this, you have the power to drive this. My sense is that that's where leadership needs to come from, that you can step up and to choose, and that if you can bring the future into the present by helping people understand that you're delivering transformative experiences for kids that will change the trajectory of their life and the dynamic of that family, if it's done right, bring and center that in how you deliver those programs and communicate that in the present. That's the opportunity that exists. And if we can deliver that, we can deliver both safe experiences, but more importantly, unlock all the benefits of sports. Appreciate everything everyone does for you sports. Appreciate this panel. See you next time. Thanks all.